Hi, everybody. I see Robin Halsey's here. Hi, Robin. Okay, I'm sorry you have not been well. I hope you're feeling a lot better now, and it's wonderful to see you back. Hey, Margot Shepard. Great to see you as well. Thank you for coming. What I'll be talking about this evening is, of course, the Bernie Sanders Green New Deal plan. And I've now had about 4 live streams on it. It's so very, very important. And this is the 5th, and I expect the final one of the live streams. So please share for me. Let's see if we can't get a few more people here. I'd appreciate, of course, all the help that you can give me. And Dale Weaver, hello to you. Thank you for coming. I'm very glad that you're here, okay, as well. So, we were in the third part of Bernie's plan when we stopped last time. And we were working our way through the section on a just transition for frontline communities. And last time I stopped after finishing the bullet point. Thanks. After finishing the bullet point, ensure the creation and implementation of the Green New Deal is accessible to people with disabilities and non-English speakers. And so that was the last bullet point I covered. So now the next one is create equitable hiring standards. And Bernie says we will ensure that all the funding, while I'm at this, let me share the page with you now so you can see and hopefully read it for yourself while I'm reading and commenting on it. Anyway, he says he's going to ensure that all the funding that stems from the Green New Deal plan follows standards and guidelines to ensure that the jobs created by investing in infrastructure are jobs that are available first to displaced workers, to veterans, to formerly incarcerated people, to people with disabilities, and people from the vulnerable communities. You know, that seems fair to me. I hope it seems fair to you. It seems to me like as though that would be required for the transition to the Green New Deal to be a just one. So I'm glad to see he put that in. Okay, next, impacted communities, including tribes, will receive a dedicated grant funding. And here he says funding that flows from this plan will prioritize to the greatest extent possible that communities on the front lines of fossil fuel extraction, transportation, and use, and those most vulnerable to climate impacts get the funding that's going to flow from the plan. And he says funding will be prioritized for low-income communities, communities of color, people with varied abilities, tribes, the communities in the rural areas, community-based organizations, and community development funds. Each agency involved will in carrying out the Green New Deal will be required to coordinate in an interagency process to ensure that local communities are involved in carrying out the plan. So this is to ensure that the proper communities are targeted for this. The frontline communities, the impacted by communities, and also to ensure that all the federal agencies that have any relevant knowledge or that have any relevant contacts to the local communities are involved in making sure that the people in those communities will be able to participate in carrying out the Green New Deal plan. Okay, remember, for Bernie, it's always not me, but us. And he wants to continue putting that into his government, okay, as well. So he wants local communities' participation in carrying out the plan and in carrying out this particular aspect of it, which is the dedicated grant funding aspect of it. Okay, then he says the first 2 years of this plan will be spent very aggressively laying down a social safety net to ensure no one is left behind. And he says, because this plan is so comprehensive in ensuring that we solve the climate crisis, we have to prioritize establishing a social safety net in the first 2 years of the implementation of the plan. There are two subsidiary bullet points under this. One, he wants to provide, for energy assistance. He says, well, we do not expect energy prices to spike because the federal government is going to weatherize homes to electrify heating and to keep electricity prices stable. Now, implied in this is that the federal government will do whatever it has to do to keep electricity prices stable, which may be a hint that if he has to use any price controls here, he's going to use price controls. That's just something, reading kind of between the lines, okay, or in back of the words. We still want to ensure that families are protected during the transition. So he's going to expand the low-income home energy assistance program, the LIHEAP, by $25 billion to help low-income families pay their heating and cooling bills. And additionally, the program will be expanded to provide 10% of program costs for maintenance of new efficient heating and cooling systems and technical assistance for the installation and use of new furnaces, heat pumps, and boilers, and other upgrades for the duration of the 10-year transition. So 10% of program costs here. Well, he doesn't say what the total program costs, are going to be, but if it's 10% of the LIHEAP program, just that program, he's talking about adding $2.5 billion for the new furnaces, the heat pumps, the boilers, and other upgrades. But it may be much more than that, because reading this paragraph, it seems to me that the program is going to be larger than just the LIHEAP aspect of it. Next, he will ensure a hunger-free transition He says, because the cost of energy and food are so intertwined, we will provide $215.8 billion for free universal school meals, including breakfast, lunch, and snacks. And that's going to help a lot of families with children, because they won't have to feed their children either breakfast or lunch or snacks during the day. They won't have to feed their children until they come home, which might involve a further snack for children and, of course, dinner at home. But that's going to save people some money. We will expand the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, by $311 billion to increase the benefits from the Thrifty Plan, which provides inadequate benefits to the more generous, low-cost food plan. In other words, SNAP has been using the Thrifty Plan, and Bernie wants to expand that to the more generous, low-cost food plan. He also wants to include those with incomes up to 200% of the federal poverty line. He wants to remove the punitive work the requirements imposed by Trump, remove barriers for college students to access SNAP, and ensure that people are not denied the benefits due to past interaction with the criminal justice system. I mean, imagine denying the benefits of SNAP to people who have a family member that has interacted with the criminal justice system in the past. I mean, that's insane. That's just insane. Anyway, Bernie's going to end that. Then he says, we're also going to expand the SNAP program and benefits to the people of Puerto Rico. I can't even imagine that it's not now in Puerto Rico. The Northern Mariana Islands and American Samoa. So they are on a par with the benefits in the continental U.S. Have to confess, I didn't know that SNAP wasn't extended to those areas. That's another little piece of insanity which the Congress has been guilty of for some time, and which, of course, the Trump administration has been guilty of. Next bullet point, he's going to ensure that the tribes and Native American people will benefit from this plan. He says the federal government will abide by treaties and respect tribal sovereignty while upholding the trust responsibility in every step of this plan. And he says tribes will be eligible for all funding available through this plan. Tribes will be able to request technical assistance from agencies carrying out the Green New Deal to equip them with the resources needed to co-manage the resources and review federal government actions through the consultation and consent process. So he once again wants to bring in targeted communities and even to provide them technical assistance so that they understand and they have the knowledge to be able to co-manage the resources that are to be given to the tribes and to review federal government actions through the consultation and consent process. So he wants to make this a real common process with the tribes, part of delivering justice to the tribes, which, if you haven't noticed, they've not been getting for some time. We will abide by the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and ensure the free, prior, and informed consent by Indigenous peoples. Very direct statements about that. Okay. Next bullet point, invest in environmental justice centered community economic development. And then there are two subsidiary bullet points under that. And the first, we will repair, dismantle, and convert fossil fuel infrastructure on our federal lands. We must not only clean up existing blighted sites, but as we transition away from fossil fuels, we must ensure no infrastructure is abandoned in a way that would create health or safety dangers for the surrounding community. And he says, we will spend $100 billion on fossil fuel well and mine cleanup. That's a big piece of change for that and indicates that Bernie is very, very serious about that. Further, we will clean up the brownfield and Superfund sites. Here he says we'll clean up and repair thousands of contaminated sites. We will invest $238 billion to clean up Superfund sites and $150 billion to clean up and revitalize the brownfields and other areas and communities that have been polluted by the fossil fuel, chemical, and the mining industries. So let's see, 238 and 150 is that seems to me it's what, 338, 388 $1 billion there, and $100 billion on fossil fuel well and mine cleanup. That's $488 billion if I have my addition right, which I believe I do. So the investment in environmental justice centered community economic development is going to be at least $488 billion. That might be enough to do the trick. Okay, but again, he's not kidding. That's a big piece of change. Okay, now we move to the next section, which is on empowering farmers, foresters, okay, and ranchers to address climate change and protect, okay, our ecosystems. And here he says, our current food system accounts for 25% of all greenhouse gas emissions. Not only can we drastically reduce on farm emissions, farmers have the potential to actually sequester 10% of all human-caused emissions in the soil. In other words, get the carbon out of the air, sequester it in the soil. And he says farmers have the potential to do 10% of everything that goes out as a result of our efforts to sequester that back into the soil, to lighten the load on global warming. And he says agriculture, forestry, and fishing are the industries most vulnerable to climate change. He says we need to incentivize farming systems that help the farmers both to mitigate climate change and build resilience to its impacts. And he says agriculture has huge potential to sequester carbon, and that we need to employ farms to transition to ecologically regenerative practices to combat climate change. And he points to the Rodale Institute and its finding that agriculture could sequester 37 gigatons of carbon annually on a worldwide basis. But he says, sadly, just 10% of farmers receive 75% of agricultural subsidies in the United States. And those subsidies don't prioritize carbon sequestration or soil health. And he says we need to start by supporting all farmers, not just the wealthy few, and incentivizing conservation, not not the over not the but we have to incentivize conservation, not actually overproducing farm goods. And then the section goes into specifics. As president, Bernie will incentivize farmers, to develop ecologically regenerative farming systems that sharply reduce CO2 emissions, sequester carbon, and heal our soils, forests, and our prairie lands. He wants to help farms of all sizes transition to ecologically regenerative agricultural practices that rebuild the rural communities, protect the climate, and strengthen the environment with an investment of $410 billion. In other words, that's another big piece of change over 10 years. On an annual basis, he's talking $41 billion roughly. He says this assistance will focus on both sequestering carbon and increasing the resiliency and increasing resiliency, I assume, of the farms in the face of extreme weather events. Funds will be used to offset the costs of enterprise-level changes and barriers to transition, including design, technical assistance, purchasing equipment, installing infrastructure, remediating sites, terminating contracts, and repaying farm debt. And he says we'll set aside $41 billion to help large confined animal feeding operations that have large environmental impacts transition to ecologically regenerative practices. And he says we'll also set aside $41 billion, that is another $41 billion, for socially disadvantaged and beginning farmers who have been historically underserved by the USDA programs. Next, he wants to pay farmers to keep carbon in the soil. He wants to pay farmers $160 billion for the soil health improvements they make and for the carbon they sequester, which is going both to mitigate climate change and help farmers to adapt to it. I don't know if $160 billion, is enough here. There was a recent estimate Uh, it was in a blog by J.D. Alt at New Economics Perspectives. And the proposal there was to have farmers sequester really, okay, as much as they could in order to fulfill the demands of the Teraton Initiative, which called for sequestering 1 trillion tons, okay, of carbon to take sufficient amount of carbon out of the air to take us back 250 years worth of emissions. And J.D. Alt estimated that that was going to cost eventually $17 trillion, which okay, is a little larger than the estimated cost of Bernie's whole plan. So I'm not suggesting that Bernie's 160 billion, okay, is inadequate, because JD's scope of his ideas and the scope, okay, of Bernie's ideas but could be different, and maybe other things that Bernie is suggesting might mean that the suggested levels of spending are not really so far apart as they seem here. In other words, I don't know whether the contrasting estimates are due to the fact that they apply to different things. But it seems off the top of my head that to pay farmers 160 billion is not going to be enough. It might be that it's going to require to pay a number of trillions of dollars if we really want this to be a major part of the solution to our carbon problems. So, I want to say something now, okay, before I go on about the overall cost, okay, of Bernie's plan. Everybody is reading it and is saying $16 trillion. How are we going to afford? I think he estimated actually 16.2 trillion. How are we going to pay for $16.2 trillion? Well, we know that it's easy to pay for it, and I'm not going to go into how we can pay for it here. I've given ideas about this, okay, enough times that everybody here probably knows what those ideas are. Suffice it to say, they're lawful ideas. They are ideas that the Congress can legislate and can apply. Whether they involve any debt issuance or not is up to the Congress, okay, and up to the federal government. Whether they involve higher taxes or not is, again, up to the Congress, okay, and up to the federal government. The whole point is that the process of paying for it is entirely independent of the processes of taxing and the processes of issuing debt instruments, okay, to pay for it. Those are separate processes with separate impacts, okay, and separate effects. And the way we're going to pay for this stuff is the same way that we're always going to pay for it, which is to say, the Treasury Department is going to order the Federal Reserve to mark up the private sector accounts, and that's what's going to pay for it. So, $16.2 trillion can be paid for that way, or if the final cost turns out to be $30 trillion over 10 years, then it can be paid for, okay, in that way. It doesn't really matter. We can pay for what we have to pay for. We're talking about the survival of our world here. If it's going to cost us $30 trillion, we'll pay for it. If it's going to cost us $60 trillion, then we're going to pay for it. If Bernie's right, and it's only going to cost $16.2 trillion, we'll still pay for it. Okay. So, next bullet point. We'll invest 1.48 billion in R&D to develop new region-appropriate farming techniques and seeds in order to respond to climate change and heal the environment. We will need to invest in non-chemical intensive practices and seed varieties that are tailored to each region's climate and soil. Yes, I also think 1.48 billion in research for that purpose is probably too little. That's only 148 million a year over 10 years. I think we probably ought to be spending more, and this is just off the top of my head, like maybe $10 million for R&D in this area because it's just so important. Okay. Next, we'll spend 24.85 billion to bolster existing programs like the Conservation Stewardship Program and Agricultural Conservation Easement Program and the Regional Conservation Partnership Program that help farmers make conservation improvements on their farm. These programs have demonstrated gains in environmental quality. So those are good programs. We know how much they cost, so probably that estimate of 24.85 billion is probably right on the mark for that. Transition to organic farming. He says we will spend 500 million to help farmers enrolled in the Conservation Reserve program, CRP, transition their land to new organic farmers. He says as CRP contracts end, we will help connect these farmers with new organic farmers who want to continue the rigorous conservation practices on a working landscape. I have no idea whether that 500 million is enough in this area. Just off the top of my head, it seems like it might be double or triple that. Okay, but relative to the total cost of this plan, if it's double, okay, or triple it, it's very small change compared to the total scale of this plan. Okay, renewable energy on the farm. Farmers should be able to grow and harvest renewable energy in addition to their crops. We will invest 1.4 billion in the Rural Energy for America program for clean energy options to both diversify income streams, save money, and eliminate fossil fuel dependence on farms. Now, I'm not sure what that is going to refer to. Okay, if the meaning here is to have the farmers grow their own fuel, which they burn, then that may or may not help the situation. It turns out it has to be a case where the fuel they burn is actually renewable in a very, very short time. So no excess CO2, okay, is put into the air. And all there is the savings due to lack of use of the fossil fuels, okay, that they're using now. But if we're at all talking about, let's say growing trees and cutting them down and making them into wood chips, okay, or pellets, and then burning that for fuel, it takes a very short time to put the CO2 from that out into the air. And it takes a very long time for the recycling to take place, to regrow the trees and sequester the soil that has been released actually back into the soil. So if that's what he means here, that's not good, because here we're looking at the short term. It's a case where in the long run, we're all dead, okay, as Keynes has said. In the long run, we're all dead. And in the climate change arena, we are all dead in the long run. We can't pursue solutions that are zero carbon emissions in the long run. To stop climate change, we have to have zero emissions in the short run. You have to keep that in mind. Enforce the Clean Air and Water Acts on large factory farms and ensure all farmers have access to the tools and resources they need in order to address pollution. Yes. Evidently, the EPA has spent more than 10 years and 15 million and has failed to develop a reliable method for measuring whether factory farms are complying with the Clean Air Act. So he says, we're going to end this weak oversight of factory farms and ensure every farmer has the resources to address all forms of air pollution and all forms of drivers of climate change. Next, he says he's going to ensure all of the rural residents, including farmers and farm workers, have the right to protect their families and properties from chemical and but also from biological pollution, including pesticide and the herbicide drift. He says farm practices should not infringe on the ability of other farmers and neighbors to carry out the normal activities of farming, okay, and of rural lifestyles. And he says we will give rural residents legal recourse to sue farmers who pollute their property. So, legal recourse there. Next, he wants to invest in family farms and in rural communities, not in corporate ownership. And bullet points under that. He wants to break up big agribusinesses that have a stranglehold on farmers and on the rural communities. According to Food, and Water Watch, quote, consolidation of the pork packing industry has contributed to the 82% decline in the number of hog farms in Iowa between 1982 and 2007, unquote. He says in our country, just 4 companies slaughter 85% of beef cattle. That's amazing. And the USDA reports that between 2000 and 2015, quote, soybean sales from the largest 4 sellers rose from 51 to 76%. That's another stunning statistic. Okay, and after the Bayer-Monsanto merger, the two largest conglomerates now control 78% of the corn seed market. And then Bernie says, in characteristic Bernie fashion, if Teddy Roosevelt were alive today, he would say, break them up, quote unquote. And working together, that is exactly what we are going to do. That is consistent with our revitalizing revitalizing rural America plan. Next bullet point. He really means business, doesn't he? Next bullet point. Ensure farmers are paid a fair price for their products with tools like supply management and grain reserves. And there he says he's going to discourage overproduction and ensure farmers receive a fair price for their products by matching the supply with the demand using the EPA's food recovery hierarchy, which starts with reducing the food source production. Says this will minimize the impact on the environment by not producing more food than is needed and will ensure that we have a reserve of food in case of natural disaster, okay, or some other kind of emergency. He wants to reestablish and strengthen the Grain Inspection, Packers, and Stockyards Administration. And he talks about the lobbyists in the Trump administration that have gutted the GIPSA. GIPSA is Grain Inspection, Packers, and Stockyards Administration, and blocked the rules helping farmers. And he quotes from the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition 2008 Farm Bill required the USDA to write regulations to empower GIPSA to provide basic protections for farmers who do business with these companies. But when the USDA tried to write the regulations, the meat and poultry industry launched a full-scale attack to get the Republican lawmakers to pass riders to appropriations bills to block the USDA from finalizing those protections for farmers. Bernie says, working together, we will restore the agency that enforces antitrust laws in the meatpacking industry. An agency, he adds, that Trump has eliminated. Next bullet point. He wants to ensure that farmers have the right to repair their own equipment today. In America today, farmers don't have the right to repair their own tractors, or other equipment, because companies like John Deere have lobbied the federal government successfully to ban farmers, from doing this. So farmers can't change engine settings or retrofit old equipment with new features. They're not allowed to modify their tractors to meet the new environmental standards on their own. They have to go through an authorized agent to do the repairs. And he says, when we're in the White House, we'll pass a national right to repair law that gives every farmer in America full rights over the machinery they buy. Next, he's going to reform the patent laws to prevent predatory lawsuits from the agribusinesses like Bayer Monsanto. Indeed. He says we cannot allow Monsanto to control 80% of U.S. corn and more than 90% of U.S. soybean seed patents. It's a situation that's only gotten worse after the Trump administration has approved the Monsanto and Bayer disastrous merger. And then he says we're going to reform our patent laws to protect farmers from the predatory patent lawsuits they've gotten from companies like Monsanto. Next, he's going to reform the agriculture subsidy system so more money goes to small and medium sized farms. He says we cannot continue to allow the top 10% of farmers to receive 77% of all government subsidies, with much of this money going to absentee farm owners who live in big cities, actually renting out their land. They don't farm their land, they rent out their land, and they collect government subsidies for doing this. So Bernie's saying no more. Then next, he wants to strengthen organic standards. Evidently, the massive farms are able to claim organic status without meeting, without actually meeting the requirements. And this forces smaller producers out of the market. He says we'll address this by starting with implementing two rules to require dairy production to be on pastures and require poultry to have outdoor access, which I guess is going to put a crimp in the factory chicken farms, which might be very good for everybody's health, by the way. Next, he wants to invest in historically underserved communities to grow the number of farmers, of color, and here he cites a number of statistics to say why this is something necessary to do. He says he concludes essentially saying this by saying that at this point, only about 5% of black farmers are reporting that they earn over $50,000 a year, compared to 15% of the white farmers. Okay. And additionally, 52% of American women farmers said they felt gender discrimination. He says, when we're in the White House, in addition, we are going to eradicate discrimination in agricultural land, and opportunities. Then he gets more specific. He says, in addition to the $41 billion he will invest in socially disadvantaged and the beginning farmers as president, Bernie will, colon. And then there are a series of bullet points under there. He's going to help the beginning and socially disadvantaged farmers get fair access to land and resources by providing $50 million for a disadvantaged and beginning farm state coordinator program. So these coordinators will also help farmers access various programs and fill out the paperwork that can be a barrier to participation for small farms. And he wants to provide oral translation assistance at all the USDA, the FDA, and the DOJ offices for non-English speakers. In other words, he wants to lower the language barriers and any of the literacy barriers that may exist. Next, he proposes to invest $1.12 billion in tribal land access and extension programs. And there are a number of subsidiary bullet points under that, which I am not going to go through, but they all seem to be necessary and for actually safeguarding the rights of the tribes and they all seem to be very good programs. He wants next to strengthen the outreach to minority and socially disadvantaged by farmers. He also wants to create a pathway to citizenship for migrant farm workers and end exclusions for agricultural workers in the labor laws. He says currently farm workers are exempt from many of our labor laws that other workers have been benefiting from for years. He says farming is a dangerous and demanding profession, and that we need to protect these workers as we do other workers. And he wants to reform H-2A agricultural work visas to substantially raise the prevailing wages, to allow workers to move between employers, increase enforcement, and hold employers who mistreat their workers accountable, and include a pathway to citizenship for those who want it. Next, he wants to connect consumers with local farms and healthy foods. And he talks about a Victory Lawns and Gardens initiative through establishing a $36 billion investment to help the urban, the rural, and suburban Americans transform their lawns into food-producing or reforested spaces that sequester carbon and save water. It says our lawns account for 40 million acres in America. We spend tens of billions of dollars each year taking care of them. He wants to reinvest that money in climate-smart practices that encourage everyone to be a part of the solution. Next, he wants to invest $14.7 billion in cooperatively owned grocery stores. And he says local groceries and co-ops are more likely to buy local products, which will help grow markets for farmers to sell their goods. We'll also use these funds to bring grocery stores to food deserts. The food deserts in our urban areas, ensuring all people have access to healthy local food. Next, he wants to incentivize schools to procure locally produced food. And he says institutional purchasing, such as purchasing from schools, can be a huge boost to local producers and build local farm economies. He says we will give a meal incentive for schools that acquire at least 30% of their food from local sources. I don't know exactly what he means by a when he says a meal incentive, but it sounds interesting. So, next, he wants to invest $31 billion in local food processing, including slaughter and also dairy processing. He says that rampant consolidation in processing has led to a lack of the facilities for small-scale local producers. It says investing in local facilities will help smaller producers to compete with the Tyson Foods of the world. He wants to allow meat slaughtered at state-inspected facilities to be sold across state lines. He says state-inspected slaughter facilities have to meet or exceed the regulations of the federal government. He says currently imported meat must meet the same standards as meat from a federally inspected slaughterhouse, but such meat may cross state lines. So he says we need to level the playing field for locally produced meat so that it too can cross state lines. So can you imagine? Imported meat can cross state lines, okay, within the United States. But our domestic, local meat cannot cross state lines. And that's amazing and ridiculous. Next, he wants to bolster existing programs that help farmers process their products on their farms with a $263 million investment. He says there are already some programs that support this, and he says we need to continue these efforts as we expand opportunities for the local farmers. I assure you we're coming very near the end now. Next one, he wants to help states, to develop food recovery and composting programs with a $160 billion investment to help solve hunger. He says if food waste were its own country, it would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases after the United States and China. He says, meanwhile, 40 million people in this country are food insecure. And he says, we need to give states the resources they need to reduce food waste and hunger in their communities. Okay, so in addition to SNAP, he wants to give states the resources they need in order to reduce food waste and presumably to distribute the foods that are now wasted to the local communities to reduce hunger that poor people in the local communities are experiencing. Another $160 billion to help to get that done, in addition to the expansion of SNAP that he talked about earlier, which is a fantastic expansion of SNAP. Next, he doesn't forget country of origin by labeling on our foodstuffs. He says unfair trade policy has let foreign countries overturn our country of origin labeling laws, even though 90% of the American people support that kind of labeling. And he says directly and simply, we must respect the will of the people and allow them to know where their food is coming from. And last but not least, he wants to incentivize community ownership of farmland. And he says one of the barriers to being able to choose a career in ecologically regenerative farming is the cost of acquiring farmland. We want communities to be able to join together to own farmland to help people grow our local, ecologically regeneratively produced food and help solve the climate crisis, and will provide government assistance to do so. We will support a robust future for the rural part of America that will be essential to addressing the climate crisis. And he says this is consistent with our revitalizing Rural America plan. And then he has a link to his Revitalizing Rural America plan, which, believe me, is in itself a very, very extensive plan. So I urge you to look at this plan, to find the link, and to link to the Revitalizing Rural America plan. I want to point out something else to you, okay, about this. Unfair trade policy, NAFTA in this case, has let foreign countries, specifically Mexico and Canada, overturn our country of origin labeling laws. They were successful at it. So, one thing that Bernie is implying here when he says he's going to reinstitute that is he's implying that he's going to withdraw us from NAFTA. Even if Trump were to renegotiate, well, of course, he's been renegotiating the NAFTA treaty, but there's no new treaty yet. Whether he finishes the renegotiation in time for his leaving office, I can't say. But what I can say is, for Bernie to be able to do this, he has to withdraw us from any trade treaties that exist at that time that are inconsistent with our need to label our foods by the country origin of those foods. I know we all want to do that. I know we all believe, 90% anyway, of the American people believe, we have a right to know where the food we eat is coming from. We have the right to require that it be labeled in this particular way. But to do this, what Bernie is going to have to do is to withdraw from some of our trade treaties, or to renegotiate them. Okay. Now, of course, the trade treaties that we have been negotiating over the last 40 years or so, actually since the Nixon administration, have been trade treaties that haven't even really been focused on free trade. They claim to have been focused on free trade, but they've really been focused on providing protection for American companies that operate in foreign countries. In other words, our multinational corporations have gotten us to pass these trade agreements over a 40-year period, which compromise the powers of the United States government to regulate foreign corporations here. In other words, what the treaty provides for is for the countries hosting the multinational corporations. In other words, where the multinational corporations have gone to do business, our multinational corporations and their multinational corporations that have come here, trade treaties have allowed them to sue in international trade treaty courts, staffed by people who work for the corporations themselves, who then get to decide whether new laws that we pass are consistent with the trade treaties or not. Now, this has served as a way for the corporations to control regulations in all the countries they trade in. This has been a protection for the corporations. Bernie's always been against this. He's always been for the idea that trade has to be fair, and he's always been for the idea that domestic policies in all of the host countries have to have a higher standing than the trade treaties. The reason why he favors that is because he thinks that the democracies in each of the countries have to be above any previous agreements that were made. It has to be possible for the countries in question to withdraw from the trade treaties or to modify them. If the people of any country happen to elect a new regime, or a new government with a mandate to change the trade policy. Here, he's defending the popular sovereignty of every nation, that engages in trade. So, this is what's causing him to say, no country of origin labeling restrictions. We want this. We have a right to know where our food is coming from. And he's implying, I'm going to get rid of any trade treaties or trade policies that are going to prevent our knowing about this. Now, what this also implies is that with respect to anything specified in this Green New Deal plan, if that thing is somehow regulated or somehow in conflict with the trade treaties that we're working under now, then what Bernie is likely to do as President of the United States is to simply withdraw from those agreements, because he's going to give primacy to the Green New Deal plan because he thinks the Green New Deal plan is a matter of survival. Now, I don't know about you, but I want a president who would do that kind of thing, who would say our domestic laws that have been passed by people voted on by the people of the United States, our domestic laws have to be primary. And if the trade treaties conflict with them, then the trade treaties have to go. We have to be able to secure our own survival. And that includes with respect to the Green New Deal as well. So winding up now, I spent 5 live streams on this plan. And the reason why I have is not because I think the plan is perfect. It's also because it also is, but not because I don't think that this plan is a wonderful plan. I do think it's a wonderful plan. I do think Bernie's done a terrific job here with his staff. There are criticisms, though, coming from the right already. And almost everything in American politics, in the major parties anyway, is to the right, okay, of Bernie. But there are some criticisms also coming from Green New Deal people who are to the left of Bernie with respect to certain parts of his plan. So this plan ought to be the continuation of an extensive public conversation on the Green New Deal. I think that conversation was recently started in a big way by Ocasio-Cortez and Ed Markey, and the resolution for a Green New Deal that they introduced into Congress but was never passed. I think this plan is an important step in having that great conversation concerning our need for a Green New Deal and what it should include. So I think Bernie's made a fantastic contribution here, and we're now finding that other people are coming forward with Green New Deal plans that they think are consequential. Andrew Yang today came out with a $4.9 trillion plan. I'm not sure exactly what's in that plan. Okay. I know that he includes a nuclear power initiative, and I know he includes a big role for high-tech industries as well, and for the private sector, which he seems to think is going to be primary in putting together that particular plan. For some time, I've thought that even though Andrew Yang is a creative person, okay, and even though he's an interesting candidate for president, I've somehow always had the feeling that he's more a neoliberal than he is a progressive. However, be that as it may, he's offered a $4.9 trillion plan now, okay, for the Green New Deal. That should be part of the conversation. And Bernie's plan should be a very big part of the contribution, but part of the conversation. And we need to give Bernie great credit for coming out with this plan and going on the line for it and not being afraid to propose something that begins to be on the scale of what we will need to overcome the climate emergency. His plan may not even be big enough, as I hinted earlier. I suspect it's not, but it's at the scale which is appropriate for the conversation. And we still have a good long while to debate this and to suggest changes and expansion to this and to improve Bernie's ideas here. But one thing we know for sure from this plan, that Bernie is determined to end the climate emergency, and that he has a very, very serious commitment to ending it. This plan indicates in its comprehensiveness how serious he is about this, because he's going to take all kinds of flack for it. And now this plan stands between him and the presidency. Because if he fails to successfully defend this plan or some further extension of it, if he fails to defend it, okay, and if the country decides that a more modest effort, okay, is needed, then I don't think Bernie is going to be the person who will be selected as the president to shepherd the more modest effort actually through the federal government. So make no mistake, I think Bernie is running on this plan now as much as he is running on the Medicare for All plan, as much as he is running on the job guarantee, the federal job guarantee. Probably more, because this plan is more visible than anything he's advocating for, okay, except for the Medicare for All plan. I mean, even the elimination of student loan debt and free colleges, okay, and universities, okay, and even the criminal justice reform plan, which he just released, which is terrific. Even those will not exceed in visibility his plan for the Green New Deal. So he's given us a great gift here, and he's taking a great risk here. And if he, along with us, is successful in making this plan a more perfect plan and getting more support for it throughout the country, then he will be able to get to the presidency. Congressional candidates will be able to run on this plan, and they will be able to win. And we will be able to have the movement we need to transform our society. So this is the significance and the importance of this plan. We all should try to get to know it as intimately as we can, and to be able to debate the various parts of it with people. And if we all want to be a part of the movement, that's what we're going to have to do. Okay, now tomorrow I'm going to move at roughly 9 p.m. I like that time. I'm going to move to discuss the workplace democracy plan, okay, that Bernie released really just a few days before this one. And this plan here kind of nods to the workplace democracy plan, okay, in a few key ways. So tomorrow we're going to learn much more about the we're going to learn a lot more about the workplace democracy plan. So please tune in with me to learn about that. I've read enough of the plan to know that it's going to be terrific too, and that it is transformational for our society. So at this point, I want to flash my please share, like, and subscribe screen and ask you that if you like this content, to please become a patron at www.patreon.com/Joe_Firestone, all in lowercase. And now I'll turn to your comments and questions and consider them. Okay, so okay, I see I'm coming in for a little bit of colorful language here. Hi, Dolores. I don't know if I said hi to you yet tonight, so hi and thanks for coming. And Robin Halsey says, my 2 cents about CIP and Lee Heap. It's basically bullshit now. CIP is an emergency electric help, which it has to be like 105 degrees, and the dog's ass must be facing the moon on the same day you have a cutoff notice or for a cutoff notice for. Unless you can afford a doctor to give you a breathing problem letter, otherwise you go dark and hot. Oh well. The Lee Heap only had people coming in to tell you your home was insufficiently insulated. Period. That's what NC gave us. Absolutely nothing. So who got the grant money? I don't know, but it's pretty clear that Bernie is devoting a lot of money to this. So clearly, he's going to reform this. Okay, I ask you to excuse me. I see on the screen my head is below the horizon again because I'm staring intently at your comments and trying to see what they were. And Robin says, hashtag, Dear God, give us Bernie in 2020. Yes, dear God. Okay, exactly. I think I'll have some help coming soon. Before the problem of having to bend over so far to see your comments. It should take about a week, but I think after that time, I'll be able to sit up straight and see your comments clearly. And Robin says, those released from incarceration can't find work and can't apply to or go near a relative who lives in public housing. So what keeps them from turning to crime again? Absolutely nothing. Our government and corporate puppets want people in jail. They made a fortune. Absolutely right, Robin. You are absolutely right. But of course, since Bernie's passing a job guarantee bill, along with the Green New Deal, they will be able to find work. And there's a part of the Green New Deal, which I covered in my last live stream, that is going to expand affordable housing by billions and billions, okay, of dollars. They will be able to find work, and it's a part of the Green New Deal. And I think people who were formerly in prison are going to have places to live. They are going to have places to work at a living wage. I think our society is going to be different. If Bernie gets even 4 years, it's going to be different. And Rob says, hello, Yoda. And Rob says, Bernie's Green New Deal is so comprehensive, you're on the 5th video. Yeah, well, it's taken a long time to go through it, and I thought it was important enough not to gloss over it. In other words, people who've been talking about it have been glossing over it because they don't do the in-depth kinds of videos that I do. I felt this was too important to gloss over and to simply talk about, the day-to-day nonsense, okay, of politics. Because this plan can be the start of a revolution. And that's what we need. So Robin says, costs should go down when you're not overpaying politicians, buddy contractors. Well, that's right. And Robin says, Bernie's plan is over question mark years and less than Trump's budget over the same time period. No, it's twice as much as Trump's budget. It's a plan over 10 years. It's $16.2 trillion over 10 years. That's an average of $1.6 trillion a year. And the military budget for Trump was, I think, is just at $750 billion. And by the way, Bernie's going to cut that. He's already indicated he's probably going to cut it by 50%. So that military budget is probably going down to $375 billion. So Bernie doesn't intend for his military budget to go up. But even if it stayed the same, the Green New Deal funding would be twice the amount, and that's just Bernie's first approximation. I think it's going to end up being at least as expensive, okay, as Medicare for All. It'll probably be in the neighborhood of more like $30 trillion over 10 years. The truth is starting to come out why Warren isn't in favor, okay, of Medicare for All. Warren's daughter was a co-founder of Health Allies, a venture capital-backed health benefits firm which was later acquired by United Health Group, the second largest health insurer in the U.S. So it's becoming crystal clear why Warren is against Medicare for All and why she is a good neoliberal that believes in markets and markets-based solutions. Well, Rob, okay, I did not know that. That may be the reason. I can't see how anybody can believe in markets, okay, and in market-based solutions when the free markets in our major industries do not exist. And Rob says, how come you're not an economics policy advisor? And one reason for that, okay, is that I'm 80 years old at this point, and I don't know if I want to be an economics policy advisor. And the other reason for it is that I'm not a PhD economist. I'm just, a poor political scientist who has studied some economics, some macroeconomics, and who now has written a total of 7 Kindle books about economics. Actually, they're mostly about fiscal policy and also trade policy. So they're books, that a political scientist could write, okay, and should write. But anyway, Rob says, I love how Bernie is dropping huge elbows on policy. I look at it like Bernie is saying, okay, you neoliberals want to ape my language to make yourselves better liars, and you're trying to copy my policy names. I dare you to beat me. Yeah, he does actually seem to be saying that. Bernie was asked about Andrew Yang's a stupid basic income proposal, and Bernie said, people want to work, and he's in favor of a job guarantee. I saw the interview. It was with Crystal Ball on the Hill. Okay, and by the way, Crystal is obviously a Bernie supporter. I mean, that's indicated in everything that she says. I mean, all the things she says seem to be opposed to neoliberalism. I guess that's why she got fired from MSDNC. Andrew Yang responded by saying that the UBI will create millions of local jobs. Yang claims this with no evidence proving otherwise. Well, he's just saying that the influx of money into the economy from that is likely to have a multiplier effect. He could probably model the impact with the FAIR model, the FAIR model that the MMTers are using. So I think that he certainly, could do a modeling of the initial impact, actually, of the UBI, and he'd probably find that it is going to have an initial stimulative impact. But he's probably also going to find that it's likely to have some inflationary impact also, and I think he doesn't want to talk about that. And Russ says, Dr. Joe, I've got to call it a night. See you soon. Thank you, Russ. Thank you for coming. It's always great that you're here. And Rob says, I really do. I care much more about the Green Party, as they seem to be much more interested in screaming and whining, but not interested, in actually governing. Thank you, Russ. Thank you for coming. It's always great. I mean, I don't know why the Green Party has done so badly over a period, of years. They never seem to get the hang of advocating for the people, of doing things for the people as part of a Green New Deal. Now, I think recently they've gotten a lot better, but of course, they need the money to be able to communicate and to get the volunteers and to create a powerful structure, of alternative media to advocate for them. And they've not been able to do that. And Rob says, fuck Andrew Yang. He's got his infatuation with big tech, and it's gross. Well, he's made a lot of money with big tech, I guess. And that's part of the reason why he's so infatuated with. But we have to listen to his ideas, and we have to critique them as honestly as we can. And we have to be prepared to refute them if it turns out that they're not actually worth much. I guess he's got numerous policy proposals on his website. I mean, I was there looking at the proposals, okay, at one point, and the impression I had, and this is just a superficial impression because I admit I didn't want to put in the time to analyze everything, but I didn't see a pattern to the proposals. What I saw was a bunch of ad hoc ideas coming from a very bright man who could list all kinds of ad hoc policy ideas um, 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 just each day, each week, each month, just spin out these original ideas. But I did not see that these ideas formed a new pattern that was not actually dependent on the neoliberal system that we have now. It seemed to me that he wouldn't be able to get these ideas through Congress. And if he did, that they likely would only reinforce the neoliberal system we have now, and the end result would be a greater degree, okay, of inequality and a swing over to the right after he left office. I think that Yang would be actually another disaster. Okay. I also think that Warren is very likely to be a disaster too, because she won't change the system enough to stop someone else who's like Trump, okay, in many ways, from taking over the government after Warren, okay, is gone. I think Bernie can change the system enough that those who follow Bernie will be able to get elected to office on a continuing basis and will be able to retain power for enough time to remake American society. So, I don't see any further comments. And I've been on here now for a little more than an hour and a half. So, I'm going to say good night. I'm going to flash my share, like, and subscribe screen one more time. I'm also going to ask you to go to josephmfirestone.com, which is my website, and look at the right-hand sidebar there, which lists my Kindle books, all my Kindle books. And you can find all sorts, okay, of books there. There are many of them on fiscal policy, but there are also some on trade policy, and there's one on the crisis in Greece in 2015, which, by the way, still, okay, is ongoing. The Greeks are still in the depths, just in the depths of the collapse that was brought on by the recession of 2009. They've never been able to crawl out of it, but simply because the Eurozone has stopped them, okay, from doing so. So with that, I say good night and thank you for coming.